Okay, it's recording now. And I'll just read the preamble and then we can start, Rory. So this, the MPO Tech meeting, the MPO Tech Committee are meeting this afternoon, September 17th at 10 a.m. with a quorum of voting members through electronic virtual communication of Zoom's software application. The meeting agenda and virtual meeting address has been posted for 1 week at the 410 Water Street East on the TJPDC website and provided to local media outlets and provided to the general public, the Tech Committee and the Tech Committee members. This meeting is open to public viewing and public comment will be allowed through electronic communication at such time as provided on the meeting agenda. As a public body, the TJPDC is allowed to meet virtually using meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget HB 29. Item 4.0-01 allows public bodies to meet through electronic communication means during emergency declarations such as the current COVID-19 emergency. The governor has declared a state of emergency. The nature of this declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body to assemble in a single location. The purpose of meeting is to discuss transit or transact the business statutory required or necessary to continue operations of the public body. The TJPDC shall make available a recording of the meeting on its website in accordance with the timeframes established in 2.23707 and 2.23707.1 of the Code of Virginia. The nature of the emergency, the fact that the meeting was held by electronic communications means, and the type of electronic communication means by which the meeting was held shall be stated in the minutes of the public body. We ask that you keep your communication devices on mute until you prepare to speak. In addition, you may raise your hand or use the chat feature to initiate a discussion. The public there'll be public comment periods at the beginning of the meeting. Those waiting to speak are asked to raise their hand function or the chat function of the Zoom program, and then we'll call on you. All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen and put the agenda up. And go ahead, Rory.
Great. So I will call this meeting to order. And first up is going to be matters from the public. It looks like we're not using a Zoom webinar, so the public is just in here with us. So if you'd like to speak, just unmute yourself.
Well, I'm Lee Condor. I'm a brand new member of the CTAC. Just want to introduce myself and elaborate very briefly on a comment I provided about the public participation plan, the third bullet. I have recently developed some alternate solutions for a couple of smart scale proposals, and just wanted to make you aware that I am a resource available to the committee to do that sort of thing at no cost to the committee, should you have any interest in it. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Lee. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
Hey, Rory.
Yep.
This is Jeanette with the City of Charlottesville, and I noticed we don't have other business on the agenda. I would love it if the committee could talk about the process and use of committees and development of smart scale projects memo that the MPO is going to be presenting to the MPO Policy Board.
Sure. Do we need a vote to add that to the agenda, Lucinda, or can we just plop that right on there?
I think we can just add it in wherever you would like to add it.
Great. So we'll put that in after staff updates, if that works, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So it sounds like there are no other members of the public. Let's go on to approval of the draft minutes from the July 21st meeting. Does anyone have any changes? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
I have an editorial or just a spelling correction. My last name is actually Bivins, not ENS.
What is it?
Bivins.
Okay.
Okay, I'm part of the I Bivens and not the E Bivens.
Okay.
And then on that note, then I would move, and I'd also make a note in your opening paragraph. Lucinda, you said today's date was the 17th. So when you're looking at that, you might want to think that it's really the 15th.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Keep
That's
track
okay.
nowadays.
That's okay. And so on that note, I would move that we accept the minutes.
All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Minutes are approved. So next up is going to be our Vtrans midterm needs presentation. Do we have Chris on the line?
Hello, good morning. All right. So thank you for having me, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Lucinda, would you be able to share my slides? I sent those over. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I believe I've met most of you all previously, but just as a reminder, my name is Chris Wishman, and I'm a transportation planner with the Virginia Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. And today I just wanted to touch back with you all on where we stand currently with Vtrans. So as most of you all on the call were involved last year when we were developing the midterm transportation needs, we're checking back in to provide an update on the prioritization of those needs, which is an ongoing effort that we've been working through in calendar year 2020. Lucinda, it may be helpful to, I guess, go into presentation mode.
I know, I'm trying. It came up on the wrong screen.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. Well, I'll go ahead and get started while we work that out. So listen to the next slide.
Is that?
So I'll keep.
There you go. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I'll keep the presentation pretty short today. It's really just to provide a little bit of background. I know most of you all have been involved previously with Vtrans and have some awareness of what it is. So just provide a brief background on the midterm needs, and then talk about the process we're going through now, which is the prioritization of the 2019 midterm needs. Describe a little bit about the intended use or some context and significance of the prioritized needs, give a very high level view of our approach, and then talk about our plan for engagement. So the opportunity to have you all view our initial results and provide some feedback on those. Next slide. So in terms of backgrounds, the midterm needs were developed last year in 2019. We worked with you all. If you remember, we had a workshop that was held in Culpeper at the community college there, where we circled around the tables, looked at maps of the measure data, and allowed folks to provide some input on the methodology. The draft needs were released in the fall of 2019, and then we worked with the CTB early in 2020. At the January 2020 meeting, the board actually accepted those needs for the purpose of, or I guess their primary purpose as a screening tool for Smart Scale Round 4. At that same time, as part of the CTB action, they directed our office to create a process and develop a process and work through a process to prioritize the midterm needs. Next slide. So just to make sure we're all on the same page with what the needs are and what they're not. So one thing with Vtrans, what we're doing is really a problem identification. So we're essentially analyzing the state's network and identifying locations where there's some issue. And we do this across a number of categories of issues. You know, we look at congestion, reliability, bicycle access, pedestrian access. We have all these different categories of needs that we look at. For the midterm needs, we're essentially analyzing the existing condition of the network, and we're identifying needs in the planning horizon of the 7 to 10 year period. So the period just outside of the 6-year improvement program. And the purpose of the midterm needs, I guess, is really threefold. So the first is what you all are mainly familiar with, and that's as a screening criteria for smart scale applications. So for a project to be eligible for smart scale, it must show some connection in meeting a Vtrans need. The second bullet there, VDOT is also using the Vtrans needs as a criteria when evaluating revenue sharing applications. And then finally, the third bullet is what I'm going to talk a little bit more about today, which is a new concept to have the Vtrans needs inform a project development or project study pipeline within VDOT and DRPT. So I'll go into that a little bit more as part of my presentation today. I guess in the next few months and into next year, we'll be coming out with some information on the long-term needs. So that work is really maybe what's more familiar from the MPO planning process, which is to do, you know, the sort of the out-year study of, you know, what are the trends in population, employment growth, what are the technological trends, what are the trends for our revenues and financial resources, to get an idea of what our long-term needs are. So that's an effort we're going to be sort of coming to you all with some information on later this year and into next year. Next slide. So focusing back in on the prioritization of the midterm needs. So I mentioned this idea of having a project development or project study pipeline. So the context or the significance of the prioritization exercise is to inform that pipeline. It's been a topic of discussion at the Commonwealth Transportation Board on 2 occasions this year, in May and then in July. They've discussed this idea. So really the primary purpose of our prioritization exercise is to inform that pipeline. But a secondary function of this will be to provide the data in a useful format that local or regional planning agencies can sort of harness that or utilize the outputs of this to help understand, you know, the state's view of the highest priority needs for both the state level and then within each VDOT district. Next slide. So I mentioned this multimodal project study pipeline. So again, the board passed a resolution in January 2020 directing our office to prioritize the needs, and then there's links in this slide to the presentations that were given in May and July. So the idea of this pipeline would be to sort of insert the Vtrans needs at the beginning of the process and help inform the studies that are being done. You know, around the state, we invest dollars in interchange modification reports and various different studies to help identify projects, but traditionally those haven't been informed by the statewide plan or the statewide assessment of needs. So the idea is to introduce the prioritized needs as a first step prior to developing solutions, and then as a final step informing the funding programs. So this is a concept that's still being developed and is still being discussed within the CTB, but this is some of the information that they've discussed to this point. Next slide. So that was really the background in the context. So now I'll just spend a few minutes talking about kind of the approach to the prioritization that we're working through, and then sort of give allude to the engagement that we want to do and some of the feedback that we're hoping to receive. So the first step in our process to prioritize was to define, you know, what geographies are we going to do prioritization at. So we took a lesson for this from Smart Scale in a way, in that we're doing both sort of a statewide or Commonwealth prioritization, but then also doing within each district another sort of level of prioritization. So for the statewide prioritization, we're focusing in on the corridors of statewide significance. So those are sort of the I-64s, US 29s, 95, 80, 81. So some of the multimodal corridors that carry the interregional travel around the state. So we're looking at those sort of against one another. So comparing the needs, the priority of needs along 95 to 81 to 66, and comparing them statewide. Within each district, we're taking a look at the regional network needs, safety, and then UDA and IEDA needs. So the prioritization of those categories of needs will be done within each district. So, within the Culpeper district, it would be, comparing all the needs within just Culpeper to one another. So this is akin to how SmartScale handles the statewide high priority funding and the district grant program funding. Next slide. So for this exercise, the universe of segments or roadways that we're looking at is really where we've identified a midterm need. So for that process, if you remember in 2019, what we did was sort of drew a line in the sand and said, if you're above this line, if you have a congestion measure that ranks above what our threshold is, then you have a need. If you're below it, then there's no need. But for this, we're looking at just where there's a need, and we needed to bring back in the measure data to understand relative severity of the need. So for congestion, we brought back in some of the measures that were used, and then also combine that with a magnitude criteria. So how many users of the system or vehicles are being impacted by congestion or reliability or the need for bicycle access. So it's really a combination across these need categories of a severity measure and then a magnitude measure. So how bad is the problem, and then how many people or users of the system does it affect? So with that, and as part of this second step, we can sort of rank or sort ascending or descending the need within each category. So I mentioned congestion, reliability, bicycle access, transit access. We have these different categories. With the third step, next slide. With the third step, what we're doing is sort of for any given roadway, combining, aggregating all the needs, the prioritized needs across these categories, and sort of giving it an overall score. And as part of that, we're also, again, taking a cue from SmartScale and providing some different options of how to weigh categories in different areas of the state. So I mentioned the district level prioritization. So, in the Culpeper district, there may be certain categories of needs that carry more weight than others. Maybe it's, safety is the highest priority. So with this step 3, we're providing some different templates or options of how to weigh these various categories against one another. And this is really the main purpose of our engagement that we want to do, is to come out and say, with these given templates, here's how some of the initial results look within your district. What weighting criteria seems to make sense. Also doing this statewide to have some different options available for stakeholders to react to. Next slide. So the fourth and final step in working through the prioritization, so we've prioritized within the need categories, and then we've combined everything together. And the fourth step was a recommendation that we've had from some of the CTB members, which is to adjust for where we have some other things going on that we haven't accounted for to this point. So an example would be, where do we have bridges or pavement in really poor shape or in need of repair or rehab? Is there any way to sort of give bonus points to segments or sort of tie break to segments that have priority needs, but then also have bridge and pavement or state of good repair type needs? We've also, in this step 4, integrated in some of the initial results for our vulnerability analysis. So we've looked at across the state where we have roadways that are exposed to sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding events. So the idea here is to adjust, give a slight adjustment to segments that are exposed to those risks. So that's really our 4th step in the process. Next slide. So in terms of where we are in the schedule, we've been working through and working internally to develop this methodology, and we're at the point of having some initial results. And the idea would be to, similar to what we did last year in 2019, is to make those results available for folks to look at and provide some feedback on not only what they're seeing as the initial results, but then kind of how we went about the process of the steps that I described, the weighting within the districts and statewide. So in order to do that, we are developing an online tool that's really an extension of our Interact Vtrans mapping application, where we can sort of make these results available and provide commenting functionality that will allow folks to go in and view the results and provide feedback. So you all may have received earlier this month invitations for these regional workshops. We've had to postpone those. So I guess at this point, be on the lookout for revised dates. They haven't been set yet, but the idea would be that we make this tool available, make everyone aware that it's ready, and then give about a month or so for folks to provide feedback. We'll then incorporate that feedback, go to the public with the information as part of the fall transportation meetings. And then the idea is that we're working towards a December, January action by the CTB on the prioritized needs. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the workshops would be, as best we can, similar to the engagement that we did last year. Obviously we can't all get together at the community college again and circle around the maps, but to the extent possible, we want to utilize our Interact Vtrans and online forum to get feedback. So again, be on the lookout for that. Next slide. So the last few slides are just kind of housekeeping. My colleague Katie String and I are sort of dividing and conquering the state when it comes to coordinating with the MPOs, PDCs, and localities. So for the Culpeper district, Katie and I actually have the district split, but I would be the point of contact for the Charlottesville-Albemarle MPO area and TJ PDC area. So if you have any questions, next slide. You can feel free to contact any of us. Here's our team's email addresses and phone numbers. And our website is a really good resource just to look at some of our materials. Again, that'll be where the workshop page will be housed. So that's a good place to kind of having your bookmarks maybe to check on periodically to know what's going on with Vtrans. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions at this time. And then if there are any questions after this, feel free to contact me as well.
So if people have questions, they can raise their hand or unmute themselves. If you're on the phone and you'd like to raise your hand, you can press *9 to raise your hand. If you look in the participants little tab at the bottom, there should be an option to raise your hand. And I have a question. Should this be something that the policy board is also looking at? The MPO Policy Board? I don't know if Chip is on or Sandy. Okay,
yeah,
so,
I'm on.
Should this be something that should be presented to the policy board as well?
Yes.
We can talk about it later.
Policy board. I think it would be a great presentation.
Okay. All right. Julian Bivens has his hand raised. So Julian, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
So I have two questions, and maybe those are broader questions, and if you say they need to be sort of used, talked about it another time, I absolutely appreciate that. But our region sort of sits at a very interesting place. It sits at the bottom of the Culpeper district, which is fine, and then it sits at the top of the Lynchburg district, which obviously we're not in Lynchburg district, and so we're always competing with geographic areas that have actually a higher density or a higher concentration of people, which I might imagine has an impact on who gets funded. And so in the spirit of this political season, is there ever any discussion about redistricting? And so looking to see whether or not districts which were established these many years ago, actually because of the way population and commercial entities or commercial activities taking place, that regions that sort of someone like our region really needs to be someplace else, or needs to perhaps have a secondary or a new region, a new district that's created for it. Because we would seem to be like one of the lesser geographic regions in the Culpeper district, and then we would certainly not be. I'm not sure how we would fare if we were in the Lynchburg district, and so. Realizing, as Chuck has shared with us, that the funds for, and Wood when he was here, that the funds for the Culpeper district tend to get allocated other places faster. And you can also say this is above my pay grade, or this is not. But that's what I'm going to be pushing on. Is this not a time to look at whether or not we're in a position to get a different kind of allocation for the projects that we want to do down here?
Yeah. So I will definitely say that's above my pay grade, but in terms of how it impacts this effort, you know, within the districts, you know, what we're doing here is working obviously within the defined districts as we have them now. And then in terms of the significance of this, you know, the priorities again won't impact funding necessarily. And I know there's been some concerns like, will the prioritized needs in some way give me a boost, or you know, in the alternative downgrade me when it comes to a funding program? And that's not the intent necessarily of this work. It's more to target where we're investing the project development or planning dollars. So I would say maybe there's less of a risk for how this shakes out to impact the funding of projects. But for your larger question, I'm not sure that I'm in a position to answer it, or if there have ever been discussions on that. Maybe folks from VDOT may have more insights on that.
Well, and maybe if somebody wants to pick in on that, but maybe at another meeting we can have a conversation on whether or not, you know, Rory and Chuck and Chip, whether or not we are in fact, how do you lobby, or is there a way to look at data that says really these districts which probably have a 30-year vintage on them now, are these really districts that reflect what the population centers have done over the last 30 years? And, you know, just like voting, is it not time to look at where transportation gets districted also? So that's my first piece on that, and somebody can pick up. My other piece is that I'm surprised about, if you could talk a little about the vulnerability, and that if somebody has exposure to sea or some of the weather. And the reason for that is that I would hope that you're also looking at the other kind, you know, so that's sort of coastal vulnerability. And here in the mountains, we're subject to a weather focus and sort of the change in weather also, you know, with the fact that we have more fog days going over Afton Mountain than we used to have even just 30 years ago when I got here. And we also, when we have dumps of snow, we have snow dumps over the 64 passages that are just, which push and can't push people to 250, which are also related to climate change. So really what I'm doing right now is sort of saying climate change is not just simply about the ocean, okay, that it does have to do with the mountains. And in this particular region, going over those mountains is a source of commerce. While I have nothing against Virginia Beach, but going up and down the road that goes along Virginia Beach, and whether or not that washes away, I'm not sure that would have a tremendous impact. It would, of course, some people will own houses down there, but it wouldn't have a tremendous impact on commerce if the road along Virginia Beach were to be washed out. Where if we were to lose significantly the road going over the mountain, that would be a problem for a whole host of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's
Yeah.
my
So
thesis is just to have that also on your agenda or on your radar.
yeah, yeah, that's a good comment. So this would be the sort of the first swing we've taken at doing this sort of vulnerability assessment across the state, and we did have a narrow or limited scope to water-related events, but for the inland areas, it was really more for flooding than like snow events or fog and things that you mentioned. So that's a good comment that, perhaps maybe when we run through this as a recurring exercise, that we'd be a little more comprehensive in the sorts of vulnerabilities that we're assessing. So I'll definitely take a note of that.
And also sort of trying to tie it to some sort of economic benefit here,
Yeah,
I do. If part of what Virginia's trying to do is be this sort of middle space for moving, particularly going back to moving road commercial traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I will say, I get the ocean, I appreciate the ocean, but I'm not sure how much commerce moves up and down those roads, except for 64 going from Virginia Beach all the way across to I guess to Kentucky. So those are my points of inflection.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Julian. The next question is from Jeanette Jensick.
Yes, I had a question on, could you talk about how you're counting bicyclists and pedestrians? Are these counts that you're conducting? Does it have to do with square footage of development? We're mostly focused on multimodal improvements. So vehicles, they're easy to count. The reason why they're coming through is the business, that if we were to widen the road, the business would go away. So just wondering how that was done.
Yeah, so maybe the best slide to think about this would be slide 8, Lucinda. I guess it would be the next slide. Yeah, so for every category, what we try to do is provide some measure of severity and magnitude. So in the case of bicycle and pedestrian, for that matter, needs, the severity and magnitude measures we really relied on here wasn't necessarily counts. It was more, I guess, for severity. In this case, we're talking about access to activity centers, so the activity centers from Vtrans. So the severity would be how far or close I am to the activity center. So the closer in, we use the distance as a proxy for how in need needs for access is. And then for magnitude, we really were basing that on block group population and employment density. So we didn't have counts for every segment, bicycle or pedestrian counts for every segment of the state. So what we used were distance and then population and employment density as our measures for this one.
Okay, great. That sounds wonderful because it's very hard to count people if you don't have the facility.
Yeah, and as we release the results, we'll also be releasing sort of a detailed methodology. So that's something that if you are looking for examples of how we've done it, for similar analysis, then that would be available to you as well.
All right, great, thank you.
Yeah, so jumping off that, I guess I'm a little confused by that methodology because, like, to me, so you're measuring severity in terms of distance to the activity center and then magnitude in terms of the population density. But to me, those are both measuring magnitude, right? If you have an activity center and then it's completely surrounded by very good pedestrian infrastructure, then your severity of your need is pretty small, I would think, in that, there's no unmet need. But by this metric, because it's close, it would be the most severe. And I mean, does that jive with what you're?
Yeah, one thing I should add, so with this method, and I guess we're diving in deep now on the method, but we took into account where there was existing infrastructure. So the severity is, like I said, distance based. So if you're close in but don't have existing infrastructure, it was equated to a more severe need than if you're you know, further away. So one limitation that we have is, especially for pedestrian sidewalk data, is not sort of universally available across the state. We do have better data through VDOT's bicycle program, you know, bicycle facilities data. So we definitely accounted for where infrastructure is currently in place as part of the method.
So, well, what do you mean, I guess, by infrastructure in place? Does that mean like a pedestrian-oriented project was done there in the last X amount of years? You know, I'm looking at the map and I'm seeing, for example, like West Main Street, which in Charlottesville, or actually Market Street might be a better option, which I think has fairly ample pedestrian infrastructure. I certainly think it could be better, but I don't think there's been any specific project there, you know, lately, but it certainly, you know, has sidewalks. Does that mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure what. Yeah, I'm not sure what map. Are you looking at the map for the midterm needs?
Yeah.
So for that, you know, with that, we didn't take into account necessarily where there's existing infrastructure that was sort of introduced with the prioritization. And what we use for that is VDOT's bicycle pedestrian facilities data, which is available on Virginia roads. And then the VDOT's also developed a sidewalks inventory. So it's not necessarily where there's been a project built recently. It's just where VDOT has documented that a sidewalk exists. So it's, again, not a complete data set. But for this, you know, if it doesn't punish or I guess downgrade the segment if there's a sidewalk in place and it's missing in the data. So I hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. And so I guess in terms of what map I should be looking at, so there's a bunch of maps in the presentation, and then there's the Interact Vtrans. Is that like last year's stuff, or is that?
So yeah, the Interact Vtrans now only is only showing the midterm needs themselves. So the results of this prioritization exercise have yet to be released. So that's sort of what I was alluding to in my presentation, is that once we have that information up, it'll be available for this sort of feedback. But yeah, the results of what I discussed today aren't yet mapped or available.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for them.
That's all the questions we have.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. And if you didn't receive the earlier invitation to the workshop, maybe let Sandy know, and I can make sure that you're on our list for when we send out the new invitations.
Great, so we'll move on to the next agenda item. It's going to be staff updates and discussion. First up is the Title VI plan updates.
Okay. So the Title VI plan is a federally required document that will help us meet the needs of underserved populations and also in the Environmental Protection Act. So the Title VI plan should be updated every few years, and the last time it was updated was in 2016, so it's due for another update. I went through the plan and updated all of the census data, and Nick helped me with the maps. And we also updated the public outreach area of the plan to match what we're doing with our public participation plan with that update, which we're going to talk about later. So the plan in your packet is the draft plan. It's the things that were updated are in blue. They're highlighted in blue. And basically, I just want to review this with you and get any comments, and then we'd like to send it to the policy board for approval. I think that in future years, we will try to do a more in-depth edit of the policy plan. It just wasn't on our, it wasn't budgeted to do like a whole revamp of the entire thing this year, but that's something that I think we agree that we want to do in future years. So any questions about the Title VI plan or the updates?
Yeah, this is Alex from City of Charlottesville. In terms of your citizens participation process, can you talk a little bit about your LEP strategy, limited English proficiency population? What are you guys doing right now, to meet their needs?
Yeah, so the MPO does not interface with the public that much. I think mostly with our meetings, like these types of meetings, which are pretty technical, we have not, as far as I know, had a request for a translator or to have documents translated into another language. If we did have a request, we would do everything within our power to translate those or have a translator available. Most of the interface with the public would be with like John and Kat and the public transit agencies, where the public are using those services, and they have their own Title VI plans that they're working on. It's equity and working with underserved populations is really important to the staff here at TJPDC. And in our current work plan, we have added a study on equity and how we can reach out to those underserved populations. So we're starting to work on studying that more and having more public engagement, which we're going to talk about later on this agenda. We have the public participation plan, which Sandy is working on, which is more about how we're outreaching to the public and including all of those types of populations in our outreach efforts. One of the things that we changed last year to reach underserved populations was we advertise our public hearings in the Daily Record, but we're also advertising it with the Richmond Free Press as well, because that reaches out to a more broader audience and more minorities. So we're working towards reaching more underserved populations. We just, this is one step in the process.
Yeah, one of the things I would recommend is because sometimes some of those folks in the disadvantaged communities, low income folks, and the LEP communities, they don't access maybe the website, maybe going to your website or reading the newspaper and things like that. So in terms of the public participation strategy or activities that you folks may consider, one of which will be some kind of direct mailing, having direct invitation if there are activities with either the neighborhood association or representing those neighborhoods like public housing or friendship court and the International Rescue Committee. So direct mailings, to them will be of great importance in terms of linking them or looping them in on what's going on. So that may be something that you folks may want to consider.
Okay, so direct mail to those regions.
Like IRC, the low-income communities, like they have a CRHA, FAR, the Legal Aid Center, Justice Center, direct mailing, and then also recruiting folks from those folks to serve on committees, will be very productive.
Yeah, this is great. we're going to be doing this with the equity study that we're working on later this year. So I'm taking notes, and I might reach out to you. I don't know if you would be willing to like send me an email so I have your contact information. My name's Lucinda Shannon, and you can reach me at TJPDC.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions about the Title VI plan update?
Yeah, less of a question, more of a comment, I guess. So I don't really have any like actionable changes or suggestions to make, but I mean, it seems to me that like your metric of success of is it working is that people do ask for translations of things, right? Like that it's available, but nobody asks for it means that either, I mean, I guess one of two things, right? Like nobody knows about it because they couldn't read the original agenda in English, so they didn't know to ask for a translation of the meeting, because how did they know that anything that they cared about was being discussed? Or, you know, nobody, you know, cares at all, but which is plausible in some cases and less in others. So, you know, I think as a general goal, you know, proactively doing at least some amount of stuff just to kind of push information out there, like the basics, so that if people are interested, they can, you know, request for more accommodation.
Okay, yeah, you guys are right on. So that's part of the equity study as well, is identifying those connections and getting more information out there. So thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the public participation plan, which is kind of a more in-depth outreach to the public and how we're engaging the public. Oh, Sandy, do you want me to pull up your slideshow?
Yeah, we can go through the agenda just really briefly. So one thing I want to mention before we get into the public comments that were received is that, again, when we kind of started undertaking this, our intention was more about, we have a new environment in place regarding virtual meetings, and it was a chance to look at what the PDC practices were and update the public participation plan to make sure that it was matching the practices that our organization was undertaking, so that everything was in sync and you know, accurate. And so the intention was, of course, that we would update the information to make it more, to make sure that everything was accurate and in sync, update references to information, that kind of thing. But it was not our expectation that this would be a major overhaul at this point. Based on the public comments that we received, I think that there probably is interest. You all can let us know what you think as well. There probably is some interest in making a more meaningful, robust update to the document that takes out some of the jargony language, makes it more accessible, and also addresses some of the concerns about outreach to populations that may go beyond what the federal regulations require. So again, our expectation going into this is that we want to make sure that we are meeting the federal requirements for public engagement, understanding that we as an organization would go above and beyond what those requirements were, but we didn't want to be overly prescriptive and leave as much flexibility as possible when updating this document. So some of the things that you all identified were incorporated into the public participation plan, such as identifying organizations to partner with, creating email lists so that when there are major updates to the plans, we have contact information for those organizations so that we can make sure that they are communicating those to their populations. But nothing in this plan was really what I would consider a significant overhaul. It was mostly just really minor, simple tweaks and revisions. So Lucinda, if you can go ahead and put the slideshow up, I'm just going to show you, we had our 45-day comment period. And while I did not get a lot of comments, the comments I got were very thoughtful, I thought. Some of these were really simple, so I kind of divided them up into two categories. Ones that would be really simple, whereas if you all wanted to approve or recommend approval of this document moving forward, you could reference these revisions and we can move forward with adopting a document with these changes. And then there are what I would consider more substantive revisions. So making the document less technical. We got a comment that I thought was really important, that we have a lot of language that says to the extent possible or whenever feasible, that kind of thing, and that can be off-putting to readers. We got specific feedback about the need to reach out to the aging population and people who live in rural areas, but also use the MPO transportation systems, that there needs to be public participation that accounts for them as well. Then there was also a comment about addressing climate change and taxpayers and making sure that they are included in the conversations as well. So some of these I think make a little bit more sense based on the purpose of the public participation plan than others, but these were the comments that we got back. So this is what, Lucinda, if you want to advance to the next slide. This is what we would propose moving forward. Is I think that there is a need to go ahead and adopt a revision to the public participation plan just to make sure all of those sort of compliance issues are in place. And then based on the public feedback that we're getting, we would look into reprogramming the Unified Planning Work Program to put more resources into updating the environmental justice plan and the public participation plan so that we continue to work to make more meaningful and robust changes at a higher level to address some of the more substantive changes in a meaningful way. So I would be happy to answer any questions you have. Lucinda, you may want to go back to the previous slide just to see what the revision, the comments were, the summary of comments, so they can keep those in mind. We have advertised this for a public hearing at the policy board for this month's meeting. So they'll have the opportunity if they choose to go ahead and move forward with adopting it. But that would be based on their recommendations. So happy to hear your feedback. And if you all feel like you're in a position to make a motion on either approving the document as is, approving the document with revisions, either specific ones listed here or others that you may see, or else tabling, you know, the vote and give us further direction. Those would be the recommendations that we would be looking for to provide to the policy board when they consider this.
I move towards accepting all of the simple revisions and approving the plan as is, understanding that there are future steps that we're going to take to make this more robust.
Okay.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next up is going to be the electrical vehicle study update.
Sorry, having technical difficulties. Okay, so we're doing a study on electrical vehicle charging station, a needs assessment. And I wanted to come to you. I'm working on the study as part of our work plan for the year. And I wanted to come to you to ask you who you think should be on kind of a stakeholder list that I should be working with. So this is the list that I have right now is Albemarle County, City of Charlottesville, VDOT, EV manufacturers, the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles, EV users, which we've already had one come forward to volunteer to be on the committee, major employers like the University of Virginia, rideshare, commuter lots, Virginia Clean Cities, which I've been talking with already, And then, of course, the MPO Tech and CTAC committees and the Rural Tech Committee, because this project is includes the whole TJPDC area. So I don't know if you want to give me any other comments, and we can kind of discuss who you think would be good to add to this list.
I would talk to the Charlottesville REA, the Renewable Energy Alliance. Obviously, they mostly produce the energy, but there's a lot of overlap with EV users there.
Okay, Renewable Energy Alliance. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Julian?
I would sort of suggest a couple things. So one, that if you're using an EV manufacturer, that you do someone other than Tesla, since they're fine creating their own ecosystem for chargers around, and that's sort of how they sell themselves. And lots of people can certainly spring for $100 grand machine, but there are lots of new vehicles that are should be coming on lines that won't use the Tesla charger. Okay, so just about everybody's coming online, whether or not it's GM, BMW, it's coming out with new Ford. There's a whole suite of sort of what I would say the broader manufacturers who will not use the Tesla charger but need to have different kinds of chargers. The other people I would suggest, there's an emerging industry of people who actually put charger subscriptions or have chargers and they're subscription based around different places. You'll notice that there's probably one over by, there's a suite of them by Burger Bach. I think that's the name of the place over there in Barracks Road, where there's that small island there where AT&T is, and I forget what else. It's AT&T, and there's a hamburger place and some stuff on that little island in front of Harris Teeter. And so you'll notice that's a group of, that's a for-profit entity that's worked, I guess, with the shopping center to put a charging unit there. But I think there's a bunch of stuff. I even may have something saved in one of my files, Shannon, that I'll send to you about this emerging alternative to Tesla that are subscription-based companies, so that you in fact could drive across the country if you desired and use an electric car to do so. But I would hope that Tesla doesn't eat up is not at the center of this conversation.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, just jumping off that a little bit. So I think a lot of the other manufacturers also have their own standards as well, which makes it all the same.
There's actually the other manufacturers all decided that they would go to make it easy, that they would say we're going to do A or we're going to go do B, and the A was the Tesla, and B is everybody else. It's like, no, we're actually just going to have a universal plug, or if we don't have the universal plug, you'll have an adapter that can go on the plug that will go into that, where there is one, but there's a lot of folderol around trying to use an adapter onto the Tesla plug. I get what they want to do. I get the boutique brand. I understand that. But if we're talking about using community funds to figure out, is there a community solution for EV? This is my own personal bias. I would lean heavily away from Tesla, and lean to the other manufacturers.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty reasonable. And I like the idea of also bringing in a company that specifically does EV charge points and isn't a car manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with the same thought in mind of not letting them dominate the conversation, because their job as an EV charging station company, government relations person, is to get us to let them put their stuff everywhere.
Just to make money. They want to make money.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I'd also add Generation 180, which is a climate group around town. They actually run an electrification campaign or events at the pavilion where they let you test drive electric cars. I think they'd be good to loop in.
Oh, right. John has actually got a whole suite of, I can't see. John is actually hoping to move deeply into electric vehicles. Now, they won't be using your charging network per se, but I think they're thinking through how to keep their on-demand vehicles. You know, they're moving into this on-demand piece. How to do that. And so if you were to just loop into them, loop whatever that expression is, then that's one of the Julian malapropisms. You just combine them all and you're supposed to understand. That might be helpful. So if you were to connect with the jaunt people, because they are doing a bunch of electrification of their vehicles there.
Yeah, and it seems like there might be a place for someone representing like the landowners where they would go, unless we're only talking about ones that would go on the city and county property. You know, whether a shopping center or whatever. Obviously, Stonefield has a bunch.
Yeah, but the Stonefield ones are over there behind, are the Tesla ones. Right now, Stonefield doesn't have at this point, and they were put there with that, you know, the Hyatt that's over there. Gotcha. And so, but I think that is actually the piece. I mean, Barracks Road has it, so you could talk to the people. I think Great Eastern still manages Barracks Road, and understand how they put the ones over there. But I think it's called Burger Bach. Am I making that up, or is that some other country? Is that some? I thought
Burger Bach was in Stonefield.
Whatever the one with the, maybe it's Zinburger. Maybe that's what is that? Is that?
Yeah,
is that feel like that's over there?
Was in Barracks, okay. Gone now.
Okay, well, on the side of Zinburger, if that's what it's called, you know, then you'll see them over there. And I think Great Eastern manages that thing. But that's the whole point. I think what you're going at Roy, is that, so if you really are trying to get people to use electric vehicles, then you've got to put the charging points in the places that they execute life, and not think that people are gonna, you know, the whole idea that I'm gonna go to the downtown parking garage and then I'm gonna find one if there's one available. But it's got to be just part of my natural flow of how I go about doing the things that I do. And so, since we have all this great data on where people go to do life in this region, that's where I would be looking at those private enterprises to see, you know, how do we sort of partner with them to sort of have spaces there, if that's possible.
I agree with that, but I'd also like there to be a focus on like how people who don't live in homes with driveways where they can just run an extension cord out can charge their EVs, right? So.
Right. I can send you something on that. A lot of that's taking place in places that are much more dense than we are. For instance, there's a big movement, and actually I've thought about this as not personally, but I've been following this as a business opportunity for some people that in fact they're converting parking meter type spaces, and they're putting EVs there. So the whole thing with that is you got to get the county or the city to be able to allow you to dig underground, right? Because you got to be able to run it underground and then pop it up in these various places. But the cool thing about that is it actually moves towards that group. It satisfies that whole group of people that you're talking about. I live in a kind of a dense area. I don't have you know, covered parking anywhere, and yet I still want to have this as I still want to migrate to this way of moving around, and they've been doing quite well in London, but London's got a whole bunch of things that we never will have here. You know, as far as taxing, the whole pushing people by taxing your vehicle, whether or not it's a high polluter or a low polluter when it comes into the city core, that's not going to happen here. But in fact, it is driving a bunch of people and helping them to facilitate that decision that how would I get this vehicle charged? And I think I've got that article still, but I'll send that to you also, Shannon, so you can just.
Thank you. All right, this is great. Thanks, guys. Is there anything else?
Bill, did I see you unmuting yourself? Oh, never mind. Not to put you on the spot.
No, it's all right. It's fine. I was just gonna say, I mean, I know UVA is on there. Just to specify, it'd probably be like somebody at Parking and Transportation would be the best point from the administrative side. Like, obviously Rebecca White would probably be the obvious choice to reach out to for that. And there may be some people like on the academic side that I'd don't quite know who that would be, but somebody at the engineering school or something might be a good resource for us.
Okay, thanks.
Lucinda, Donna Chen is a professor at UVA in the transportation department, so she may be able to provide some suggestions for you.
Okay, thank you.
She's on the CTAC committee.
Yeah.
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 And it looks
This
like
is
we've
also,
got Chip in the chat saying CCC, the Community Climate Collaborative, would also be a good addition.
so are they an entity? Because I read their report, but I thought they were just kind of like convened and then disbanded. Are they like?
No, they're a nonprofit. They get like an executive director and
Okay.
other people with titles.
All right, I will reach out to them definitely. All right, thanks guys. Let's see, trying to find the agenda. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the next item is the tip adjustment, and that is our transportation improvement plan is a document that we regularly update. It's in alliance with VDOT's 6-year improvement plan. And we adjust our, like the tip and the SIP need to stay kind of the same. So the tip is the local document that we kind of keep track of here, and and then the STIP is the state projects. So our local projects are all in the tip, the projects that actually have funding allocated to them. And so regularly the state will reallocate money or move it around, and then we have to adjust our tip to match theirs. So this is just 2 small adjustments. We won't need to do a public hearing or anything on them. The first is, and they're both maintenance blocks, so it's kind of all the maintenance stuff grouped together, and it's just transferring $6 million from preventive maintenance to safety or preventive maintenance system preservation. So the memo's in your packet. There's 2 blocks that are adjusted. So the block on the bottom is the new table, and then the block on the top here is the old table. And like I said, it's just kind of moving money around between the different groups. Are there any questions? Okay, this will just go, like it's an informational item to the policy board as well. And I guess our next item would be the smart scale, the new smart scale policy. And I have the memo from the policy board packet here. So I know Jeanette wanted to talk about this, and Chip is on the line too. I don't know if you want to introduce this, Chip.
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Appreciate y'all having me for this. As the policy board was considering the projects for the current smart scale round this year, a couple of projects stood out that a number of citizens and groups commented that there wasn't adequate public involvement in the process. While we met all of the required public participation by VDOT, it brought up quite a bit, and especially one project in particular that the policy board would like a longer and a more public involvement in coming to the recommended projects. And let me say, what's being proposed is solely for the MPO projects. Albemarle County and City of Charlottesville, it would not affect the projects that they work on to submit to Smart Scale in any way. And it wouldn't affect their request to the MPO for support of their local projects. It's strictly for the projects that the MPO would be submitting on behalf of the MPO district. So, but with that, the recommendations came to try to find a way to have a more robust public involvement in the process of selecting the projects as well as the design of the projects that would go through to application. And so in looking at this, and hydraulic, just for those of you that have been around, the hydraulic in 29 process is the model that was recommended that we should try to follow. There's no way we would have the resources to do that in depth, in detail of a process, but just using that as a model to engage the public and with regular meetings, and use a advisory panel to help put together the proposed projects. So with that in mind, we put together this draft process that we're going to continue to work on and develop so that if the MPO policy chooses to adopt it, it will be ready for the next round of smart scale. And so what you see kind of in the memo that we've put together for the policy board is that in January to February of every other year is when VDOT releases the smart scale scoring for the current year. It's at that time you start for the MPO, we start to see how did our project score, really well or really badly. It's not long after that that VDOT then makes their recommendations to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for the recommended projects for funding, both at the district level and at the state level. When those scores are released, this proposal, it proposes that we would begin looking at the projects that we submitted that do not look like they're going to get funded in the current round. Use those projects and start to build from that as to which of these we would want to start planning for to submit in the next round, which is 2 years later. At that point, using that data, also opening it up to the public, to the local governments, to CTAC, to the technical committee, what other projects should be prioritized so that it's within the next couple of months then that a prioritization could come out where 4 or 5 projects that the MPO Policy Board would want to consider would be identified. Of those 4 or 5, we could not do a robust community engagement process for each of those. That we just do not have the resources to do. And so what we're proposing is that the policy board, with the recommendations of CTAC and the technical committee, would be to identify 1 or 2 of those projects and do a robust community engagement in working out the development and the plans, concept plans for the projects, the transportation projects. As I said earlier, this would follow a model very similar to what we did for hydraulic in 29, where an advisory panel would be appointed by the MPO Policy Board. They would meet regularly in public meetings, and they would help to develop the plan that would later become the application. The downside to that is that the MPO would have the resources to facilitate and manage those 2 projects through this process, but only for the administration and facilitation. We would not have resources for design work, which would be instrumental to this. So we would rely on either the local government's resources or VDOT's resources to help with that design work. And therefore it requires making these decisions early on so that we can receive those resources to see this through. And another reason why there can only be 1 or 2 projects prioritized. The other projects, what I just call minor projects, they will follow the same format we've been going, where we work closely with VDOT in putting together concepts to submit for the final smart scale applications. Once these go through the process. Then the policy board would recommend those to go forward with application. Letters of intent would have to be sent in. Right now, it would be in April of 2022, and continue work with the two panels until the final applications are submitted in August. And that's right now what we're proposing. The time schedule that's on the handout is very, very subjective. Number one, it's based on if VDOT keeps all the same timelines. If they change the timelines, then our timelines would change. But it's also working it out so that we're trying to schedule it where the MPO Policy Board only meets every other month. We're trying to get approvals during those every other meetings so that we wouldn't have to schedule special meetings. So that's it in concept. We're going to be working on this in the next 30 to 60 days to put together a final draft. And we want to work closely with the technical committee and with CTAC to help us to develop this. And we are also looking at, and I know this isn't, within your mission, but we're also looking at doing the same thing for the rural projects. Just like the MPO, the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, they can also submit 4 projects with each smart scale round. And we're looking at following this same type of process. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, I have a question on, is there any project area that has been proposed that would need to go to this level of public participation?
A very good example would be the recent Route 20 shared use path that borders the city and the county on Route 20.
Okay, because the issue there, it seemed to be that the public wasn't aware of that project at all. It wasn't that there wasn't a robust enough plan. It's just that they were surprised that we were submitting it all.
Well, we heard very strongly that they wanted to, that a lot of the public wanted to be engaged with coming up with the design. And they didn't know in time to be engaged.
And I guess from the city's point of view, at least from my point of view, is that this plan is moving so fast, and we are trying to come up with our own way of including the public in our smart scale applications, that this is kind of almost leapfrogging. And I'm not sure if it's taking into account our CIP process. So I would need to know now what the MPO would be requesting of the city in terms of funding in order to get it in place, in order to get it approved by July of 22.
Right. And I guess that's part of why we are trying to get this in place, but understanding being the first year, I mean, I would hope that it would be different, but it would be very likely that we couldn't ask the city or the county for the financial resources for design work, just because, as you say, there's such a lead process. We may have to start working on getting those resources for the next smart scale round, because you have to plan this stuff so far out in advance, is what you're saying, Jeanette. You're right. So right. And I don't know. I mean, I would love it if there could be some financial resources available, but I'm not sure we'll be ready for it and can get it approved in time for, less than a year from now.
Well, and that's kind of my next point, is that we've been told that the CIP is going to be very lean. And this is just, kind of early preps for our process of don't expect to propose a brand new big project. There's not the revenue. Everyone's nervous about the current economic forecast, the whole bit. So the earliest that we could probably do it, if the city council was behind this, was July 1st, 23, is when the funding could be available.
Yeah.
And my other concern, just as a staff member, is that we have a lot of plans out there, like the hydraulic 29 that we don't know if it's going to be funded. We've done the review of the Ridge Street that VDOT took, you know, work on design and concept. We have Free Bridge that's been out there for a while. And if we're going to do another plan for Route 20, we're again asking for money in hopes that we will eventually get funded. And that's something that city staff has been unsuccessful in acquiring funds for our own projects, let alone for these big regional projects.
Sure.
So
No,
has anyone
and-
from the city been just talking about this schedule and this plan and strategy? Have you been talking to anyone at the city?
No, only through the MPO committees.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because, and I would say even one of the things that would happen is it would help to prioritize. I mean, because I'm a big believer, you can prioritize a lot of things in local governments, but the real priority is, do you fund them or not? That's right. Where your real decisions are made. And I think this would help us to determine what projects are priorities for our local governments. And if they're willing to put the design resources into it, then it is a priority. If they're not willing to put the financial resources to it, then perhaps there are other projects, and even in local governments that would move those projects up that level. So I think this would help us to do that. I would rather have this process in place without the financial resources than to not have the process in place and continue on the same path that we've been going, because we haven't been doing the local financial resources for the design work anyway, except for those very long-term projects like you mentioned, Jeanette, with putting money towards hydraulic, which each of the local governments did. But I'd rather have a process in place, and especially one where we're able to get the community more engaged before really the decisions are made that we're going to apply for the projects towards smart scale.
Well, I can share from the city's perspective that we are working to incorporate the smart scale process somehow into the comprehensive plan. So what makes me nervous about this sample schedule is just how we're not going to be done. We're not going to be ready for discussion about this in February of 2021. So if you're not looking for the financial commitment, if you don't think that that's possible, maybe we can slow down this schedule a little bit and let us all get up to speed and still allow for public participation.
Well, I don't see how we can, if we slow it down, I don't see how we get what we need in place in time to submit the letters of intent. And again, I just remind, this is only for the projects that the MPO looked to submit. So it has nothing, it would not affect any of the projects that the city or Albemarle County submit on their own. And
I understand, it's just, yeah, you're kind of getting ahead of us. So the city won't know what projects we're submitting for, but we'll be talking, I guess, on a regional level.
Yeah.
Hey, this
Kevin?
is Chuck. I can chime in too. I understand that this is a situation that's occurring, and it's not just here, it's across the state. We're looking at trying to come up with some system that's going to create this multimodal. I know Chris brought it up during the presentation, pipeline of projects, to where we can have this sea of projects that we can pull from for submissions. There are resources that are available through the state, both at the district office and at central office that can be utilized to offset some of these costs for some of the development costs. I think part of the issue we're seeing is not necessarily the resources of developing the project, it's funding the projects. And I think that needs to be something that needs to be considered in addition to the resources in developing it. And I think we need to focus on both pieces of it, because we can come up with a lot of projects, a lot of designs, and a lot of concepts, but if we can't get them funded, we're wasting all those resources. So we need to look at it from twofold. And so we need to look at it, where can we best utilize the limited resources we have to accomplish the task we want to accomplish. Does that make sense, Chip?
I think so. I think so.
Well, what I'm saying is it may be better to use local resources to buy down the cost of applications as opposed to necessarily just funding the studies and then not having resources to buy down the cost of the project.
Well, I mean, I guess my thought there is you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars to help put a concept design together versus millions of dollars for buying down the cost of the construction.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be the construction, because it's the right-of-way piece. It's all the pieces that go into a project that we need to consider. So there's a lot of other things that can take place that the localities have resources that they can bring to the table that the MPO and the state doesn't. So I just was throwing that out there as food for thought, that we can help with a lot of the prep stuff, so to speak. If you guys work on the public participation piece, and then we can come up with a project that's everybody can support, and then we got to look at how are we going to get it funded. That makes sense.
That makes very much sense. Although I see Kevin has his hand raised, I'm sure he's got the answer.
All of them. Well, I appreciate this. I think this is a good start for kind of getting some control, some additional control and a process in line for how we go about this, and I think really I accept the blame for a lot of this, because we do have a process where we prioritize our projects and we identify what we want to submit for Smart Scale, and we make those submissions. But in these past couple rounds, people have thrown out additional projects to consider, and we had room in that cap. And I was like, sure, why not throw more in, not thinking that there could be some blowback to that. I was just like, but if we stand a chance of getting some funding, let's throw it in and try and get it. And I think that we're, as a county, or at least me personally, we're going to rethink how that process goes. I think we're going to be a lot more narrowly focused and only go after those projects that are those high priorities. And what I see with this process that you've laid out is that it's really intended to be for those projects that we can't fit within our cap. So the county will still prioritize our projects. I think it's more than likely that we are going to probably apply for our 4 projects max, and then it's only going to be on those rare occasions when we're going to ask the MPO if they would work with us on additional projects, or if there's obviously a major regional project similar to like the hydraulic or RIO projects that it makes more sense for you all to do. And those are the only instances when this would come into play. And I think that what you've done reasonably, Chip, here is say, look, if you're going to ask us to help, that's fine, but we want a process that we follow so that we can defend it and we can move through it easily. So I think this is good, and I appreciate that the city maybe is still working on how they prioritize the projects they're going to do. We're going to probably tweak our process with that a little bit and get some more public engagement early on. But overall, I just say I think this. I support this mostly because really it's focused on your organization at the MPO and the projects that you specifically identify or that the city or county ask you to help with. So thanks for doing it. And I think I may model some of what we do internally off of what you do.
Thanks, Kevin.
And what's the timeline for adopting this plan exactly?
We would, I mean, if the months hold true, which again, this is still in a very draft form, but if the schedule holds true, we would need to adopt it before the first of the calendar year. The important part to me is to really start looking early, and according to VDOT's webpage, VDOT will have the scoring completed in January, I believe. So that is our first blush at how did we do with the current round? How did our project score under the current round? And use that as the starting point on what projects we should be looking at in the future. And I say starting early because I think we do have a successful project in our region that kind of followed a little bit of this, in that we submitted a major project for the exit 118 that scored almost the lowest in the state in the first round of Smart Scale. Soon as we found out how low that scoring was, VDOT began working on a redesign, breaking it out into smaller components, so that the next round of Smart Scale, we had a concept, submitted that, and it actually got funded, and it's under construction today. So the quicker we can start looking at alternatives from the projects that are scored, the better off we'll be. So that's why starting in as soon as those scores are out is so important.
Yeah, could you, Chip, send out this memo to all of us? This is the first I've heard of it.
Glad to, yes.
To me, there does seem to be some amount of value in coordinating how the three entities that are submitting are publicizing this information out to everyone, since most of these projects, even, obviously they're in one locality or another or crossing them, for the average citizen of Charlottesville, Albemarle, they're not really drawing that distinction, right? Like, they want to hear what are the plans, and I feel like the problem with Route 20 and honestly 10th and Grady was less about getting input in, though I mean ultimately that was the problem, but in getting the information out, in that there was any plan to do anything with those intersections at all. And so if we could release like a coordinated statement with like even just the names prior to designs being done of what we're considering, drum up some like media, and get it out in the local news so that people know what's happening. Then the people who are like, wait a second, you're doing something to the Route 20 intersection, I just planted like 300 trees there 2 years ago, you better not rip those up. They're going to get pissed off and they're going to actively reach out to you, and that's going to get where we need it to be. But up till now, they didn't know about it until the entire design was complete. I think that's part of the problem.
Right, exactly. Nope, I think you're right on target.
But if I could come in for a second, just to sort of back up on the excuse me, how this was helpful sort of as a participant and later on when we didn't get funded. The Route 29 hydraulic project, which we put, and I thought, an enormous amount and some very good work in sort of moving that project along. When it didn't work, when it wasn't selected because the tunnel in Norfolk was selected and ate up all the billions of dollars, being able to come back and use the work that Chuck and Chip and the whole committee did to sort of break that project down to be able to submit it again for this season, for this round, I thought shortened the process and made the process a lot easier to just sort of navigate through. So having that kind of disciplined and shall I say obvious approach on how we sort of move through sort of major projects. Well, Chip, I agree with you. That may not be the absolute sort of positive way to get all of them done, but there are certain projects which I think you and sort of the professionals like Kevin and would say this would be something that and Chip that we would might be a sort of a helpful way on sort of approaching this. If not for today, if it does get rejected and we do have a strong commitment to it, then it would at least allow us to be prepped for the next go round, which I thought bought us an amount of time and also allowed us to smooth out to sort of respond to the community, smooth it out, and also push it forward in a time frame that I was actually quite pleased to be part of. So I'm endorsing that and endorsing it that it doesn't necessarily have to be for every project, and that I'm good with that.
Thank you.
All right, so are we going to have upcoming action items related to this memo next meeting?
Yes. We'll come back to you with a more formal proposal and ask you to send it on to the MPO Policy Board with your recommendations.
Okay, that sounds good. Again, I appreciate being able to see the memo. And Jeanette, I'd love to hear more about what the city is planning in terms of rolling the smart scale process into the comp plan. And, you know, I know the comp plan is currently planned to be adopted roughly in the beginning of next spring. So, you know, how that timeline will interact with, you know, all this if it goes through.
Sure, I've been talking with Missy about it. So
Lee, unmuted. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, again, just to reiterate, as far as a design resource, I'm a free design resource. So some of these smart scale things I've done on my own, I can help with that. And it doesn't cost anybody anything.
Great.
Lee is a transportation engineer, so he has experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the MPO and, you know, the city and county use free resources that citizens are offering. Like, I think all over the spectrum, people with expertise want to get involved and help. So any way we can figure out to make that happen is a good thing. I don't know if any staff members have any comments on that. All right. Well, let's see. Other members of the public, Mr. Sean Tibbs, do you have any comments? If not, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all.
Hey, Lucinda.
Yeah. Oh, let me stop recording. Hold on. How do I do that? I think I just have to end the meeting, Sandy. I'm